What if I told you that a single moment in history transformed an entire civilization? That the fierce and proud Turkic tribes, once distant from the lands of Islam, worshipping the sky god Tengri, would one day become the sword-bearers of the Muslim world. This is not just a story of conversion. It's a tale of destiny, war, betrayal, faith, and something deeper. Before the Ottomans, before the Seljuks, before the world had ever heard of Mehmed the Conqueror or Suleiman the Magnificent, there were the Nomads. Horsemen of the wind. Children of the steppe. They roamed freely through Central Asia, untouched by the call to prayer, loyal to their ancient gods, their tribal leaders, and the rhythm of the open plains. But something changed. Not overnight. Not easily. And not without struggle. So ask yourself, what makes a people give up their gods? What makes warriors, trained to fight, conquer, and survive, kneel before a new faith? And what moment in history turned the gaze of the Turks toward Mecca? To answer this, we must go back, deep into the heart of Asia, centuries before the Ottomans built their empire, to a time of empires clashing, ideas spreading, and hearts searching. It is here, in the untamed frontiers between the Muslim world and the vast steppes of Central Asia, that a hidden chapter of history unfolds. A chapter that would shape the identity of a people, and ultimately, the course of the Islamic world. But make no mistake, this journey was not peaceful. It began with resistance. The early Muslim armies, fired with the zeal of Islam, marched eastward during the 7th and 8th centuries, seeking to expand their borders and spread their message. But they did not find soft resistance. They found the Turks fierce, organized, and unrelenting. The Arabs and Turks clashed again and again in brutal campaigns, where neither side would give in easily. For decades, the Turks stood as hardened enemies of the Muslim armies. But then, something happened. A shift. An alliance. A betrayal. A battle so critical that its echoes still ripple through the corridors of history. The Battle of Talas. You may never have heard of it. Few have. And yet, it was a turning point, where destinies were rewritten and the seeds of Islamic faith were sown in the hearts of Turkish warriors. This moment changed everything. It wasn't just a military victory. It was the spark that lit a fire that would spread across Turkic tribes over generations, until they not only embraced Islam, but rose to defend it, rule by it, and spread it farther than the Arabs ever had. But why? Why did the Turks not only accept Islam, but become its greatest champions? Was it because of trade and politics? Was it because of military alliances and economic opportunity? Or was there something deeper, something spiritual, that drew the hearts of these warriors toward a faith they once resisted? This is the mystery we must unravel. This is the journey we invite you to take. Because the story of the Turks' conversion to Islam is not just about religion. It's about identity, power, struggle, and ultimately, transformation. Over the next few minutes, you will witness an epic tale unfold, from the wild steppes of Central Asia to the courts of the Abbasid Caliphs, from brutal battlefields to the quiet moments of revelation that changed hearts forever. And you'll discover how a people once seen as outsiders became the very protectors of the faith. This is not fiction. This is history, alive, raw, and real. So, before we go any further, ask yourself, what does it take for an empire to rise in the name of a new belief? What unseen forces guided the Turks from Tengri to Tawhid? Let's begin this journey, not with an answer, but with a question. What if the destiny of the Islamic world was forever tied to the wild heart of the Turkish steppes? Long before the crescent of Islam rose over the minarets of Anatolia, long before the Ottomans built an empire stretching from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia, there were the Turks. Not yet Muslims. Not yet united. But already a people of great strength, resilience, and spirit. In the heart of Central Asia, stretching from the Altai Mountains in the east to the Caspian Sea in the west, lived a complex web of Turkic tribes. These were nomads by nature, horsemen of unmatched skill, masters of the bow. They lived in tents, moved with the seasons, and revered the vastness of the sky above them. They called it Tengri, the blue sky god. To them, the sky was not just a place above. It was a living force. Eternal, watching, judging. Tengri was the giver of life, the protector of the righteous, the punisher of the proud. These beliefs weren't written down in holy books or practiced in grand temples. Instead, they lived in the rhythm of nature, in oral traditions passed down from elder to child around flickering campfires. Their religion, known today as Tengrism, was less about formal rituals and more about harmony with the natural world, loyalty to the tribe, and a deep reverence for the unseen power of the heavens. But the world beyond the steppe was shifting. And while the Turks continued their age-old traditions, two vast civilizations were growing stronger at their borders, civilizations that would eventually pull them into the tides of global change. To the southwest, the Islamic Caliphate had already transformed the political and religious map of the Middle East and beyond. After the passing of Prophet Muhammad in 632 CE, the Muslims expanded rapidly under the leadership of the Rashidun and later the Umayyad Caliphates. Within a few generations, Islam had spread across Persia, the Levant, North Africa, and even into the Iberian Peninsula. Yet by the middle of the 8th century, the Umayyads began to fall out of favor with many Muslims. Discontent brewed over issues of justice, inclusion, and leadership. In response, a powerful new force rose to challenge them, the Abbasids. The Abbasid revolution swept across the Islamic world like a storm. By 750 CE, the Abbasids had overthrown the Umayyads and taken control of the Caliphate. They established a new capital, Baghdad. Unlike the Umayyads, the Abbasids opened their court to Persians, Arabs, and eventually, to the Turks. At this point in history, the Turks were still considered outsiders by most settled civilizations. The Chinese viewed them as dangerous nomads. The Arabs saw them as fierce and untamed. But both empires understood something important: the Turks were powerful. Their warriors were quick, disciplined, and terrifyingly effective in battle. And wherever there was war, there was opportunity. To the east of the Turks lay the mighty Chinese Tang dynasty, at that time one of the most advanced and powerful civilizations in the world. The Chinese had long interacted with Turkic tribes, sometimes trading with them, sometimes fighting them, and sometimes even employing them as border guards or cavalry in their own armies. Caught between the growing Islamic Caliphate and the ancient Chinese Empire, the Turks found themselves at a crossroads. But they were not simply passive observers of history. They were deeply involved in the conflicts and politics of the time, often hired as mercenaries, sometimes forming their own states, always watching for the next shift in power. It was during this volatile period, between the mid-700s and early 800s, that the Turks would begin to brush up more closely with Islam. At first, these encounters were mostly violent. The Arab Muslim armies pushed eastward into Central Asia, seeking to expand the reach of the Caliphate and bring the message of Islam to new lands. But they met fierce resistance. The Turks did not submit easily. For years, the Arabs and Turks clashed in a series of brutal confrontations. Each side suffered losses. Each side tested the strength of the other. These early encounters were not stories of peaceful preaching or mass conversion. They were tales of war, resistance, and bloodshed. But history is not shaped only by violence. It is shaped by turning points, moments when everything changes. And one such moment was drawing near. As the Abbasid Caliphate solidified its power and the Chinese Tang dynasty continued its dominance in the east, the stage was being set for a dramatic collision. The Silk Road, one of the most vital trade routes in history, ran right through Central Asia. Whoever controlled it held the key to economic and political power. Both the Abbasids and the Chinese knew this. So did the Turks. It was this intersection of trade, religion, empire, and ambition that would eventually lead to the Battle of Talas, a seemingly ordinary military conflict that would become one of the most significant turning points in Islamic and Turkic history. But before we get to that, it's important to understand the mindset of the Turks at this time. They were not yet one people. They were a tapestry of clans and tribes, Karluks, Khazars, Oghuz, and many more. Some had begun to flirt with power through alliances with the Chinese. Others remained fiercely independent. A few had already begun to encounter Islam through trade and diplomacy, even as others still clashed with Muslim armies on the battlefield. Yet despite their differences, they shared a core identity, proud, resilient, and deeply spiritual in their own way. And though Islam had not yet entered their hearts, destiny was already moving toward them. It was not Islam that chased the Turks. It was history itself that carried both toward the same path. A path shaped by war, trade, curiosity, and the slow, steady awakening of a spiritual bond that neither side had yet fully understood. At this point in the story, the Turks had not converted. They were not yet Muslims. But the pieces were in motion. The great powers were aligning. The tensions were building. And soon, in a single clash along the banks of a river in modern-day Kyrgyzstan, history would change forever. But not in the way anyone expected. Because when the Abbasid army met the Chinese Tang forces at Talas, the Turks were watching, waiting. And when they chose to act, everything shifted. And so, the scene is set. The actors are in place. The ancient faith of the Turks stands proud, but vulnerable to change. The Abbasids are rising, ambitious and open to alliances. The Chinese are strong, but overconfident. And the Turks are caught in between, still undecided, still wild. But not for long. Because what happens next will rewrite the story of a people and introduce Islam to a new defender, one that would shape its future for centuries to come. Shall we continue? For decades, the vast steppes of Central Asia echoed with the sound of hooves and the cries of battle. The Turks were no strangers to war. But the wars they would fight in the 8th century were unlike anything they had known before. As the Abbasid Caliphate solidified its power in the west and the Tang dynasty flourished in the east, the Silk Road, lifeline of trade and diplomacy, became a corridor of contest. And right in the middle of it stood the Turks. Neither fully aligned with the Muslims nor loyal to the Chinese, the Turks played a dangerous game, shifting allegiances, calculating advantages, and watching both sides with wary eyes. The early interactions between Turks and Muslims were not peaceful invitations to faith, they were fierce encounters. Muslim armies, eager to expand eastward, encountered Turkic resistance in places like Transoxiana, the rich region between the Amu Darya and Sir Darya rivers. Known for its fertile land and strategic cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, this region became the focal point of struggle. Here, the Arabs clashed not only with local Persian-speaking rulers but also with Turkic mercenaries hired by the Tang dynasty and regional powers. These Turks were not yet converts. They fought as warriors of their own creed, hardened, fearless, loyal to their tribal codes and ancient sky gods. The tension escalated. Skirmishes turned into battles. The Muslims, under the banner of the Abbasids, pushed east. The Chinese, sensing a threat to their influence over the western regions, pushed west. And then came 751 CE. A year etched into the fabric of history. The city, Talas, located near the modern-day borders of Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. The event, a confrontation between the two superpowers of the age, the Abbasid Caliphate and the Tang dynasty. On the surface, it seemed like another battle in the long struggle for control of Central Asia. But beneath that, deeper forces were stirring. The Abbasid army, led by General Ziad ibn Salih, advanced into the region to protect their interests and secure control of Transoxiana. The Tang dynasty responded, sending a formidable force under General Gao Shenji, a Korean-born military commander renowned for his cunning and victories. Between these two massive forces stood a powerful Turkic tribal group, the Karluks. They had initially allied with the Chinese. But alliances, in those days, were not sacred. They were tools. And the Karluks, watching the movements on both sides, were preparing for a move that would change history. As the battle at Talas began, the Chinese appeared to have the upper hand. Their formations were disciplined, their cavalry effective. But then, midway through the fighting, everything changed. The Karluks betrayed the Tang. In a stunning turn of events, the Karluks, previously Chinese allies, switched sides mid-battle and launched a ferocious attack on the Tang army from the rear. The Chinese were caught in a pincer movement, confused, surrounded. The tide turned. The Abbasids crushed the Tang forces, sending them fleeing eastward, broken and humiliated. It was a military victory. But it was more than that. It was a shift in alignment. The Turkic world had just taken its first major step toward Islam, not through sermons, but through strategy. But the question still lingers, why did the Karluks turn? Why betray a powerful empire like China? The answers are layered. There were political motives, of course. The Karluks resented Chinese dominance and sought a greater share of power in the region. The Tang had recently suppressed a rebellion by another Turkic group, and trust between the Turks and Chinese had already begun to erode. The Abbasids, with their Persian allies and promises of recognition, offered a better deal. But there was also something else, something beginning to stir among the Turks. A curiosity. A spark. Because after Talas, the Muslims did not just leave. They stayed. They talked. They traded. They intermarried. They shared their faith. And unlike the rigid hierarchy of Chinese imperial religion or the distant concept of the sky god Tengri, Islam offered something radical. It offered unity under one God, Allah. It offered equality among believers, regardless of race or tribe. And it offered a written revelation, preserved and powerful, in the Quran. The Turks, so used to oral tradition, found themselves intrigued by this structured and disciplined way of life. And more importantly, they saw how Islam honored strength, discipline, and courage, values that matched their own warrior code. Over the next few decades, Islam began to seep into Turkic society, not through mass campaigns or forced conversion, but through slow, organic change. Muslim merchants traveled deeper into Central Asia. Sufi mystics spoke with gentle hearts and wise words. Turkic soldiers joined Muslim armies as mercenaries, and eventually, as brothers in faith. One by one, tribal leaders began to accept Islam. And when the chiefs converted, the tribes followed. The first major Turkic dynasty to adopt Islam was the Karahanid, around the 10th century. Their conversion marked a point of no return. They established mosques, supported scholars, and sent missionaries deeper into Turkic lands. From them would rise the Seljuks, and from the Seljuks, the Ottomans. But rewind for a moment, because the seeds of that transformation were planted at Talas. Without that battle, without that betrayal, without that moment of chaos, the Turks might never have turned westward, might never have looked to Mecca, might never have become the defenders of Islam. And the Abbasids? They knew what they had gained. After Talas, the Abbasid court began recruiting Turkish warriors into their elite military units. These soldiers, called Ghilman or Mamluks, would eventually rise to dominate the military structure of the Caliphate itself. At first, they were outsiders, hired help. But within a century, they would become the true power behind the throne, Turks commanding armies, shaping politics, even founding new Islamic dynasties. The irony is striking. The Turks, once enemies of Islam, became its greatest protectors. The people who worshipped the sky, now prayed 5 times a day toward the Kaaba. And those who once battled the Arabs, became the leaders of the Muslim world. But this transformation was not immediate. It took decades of subtle shifts, moments of trust, intermarriage, teaching, and trading. And yet, none of it would have been possible without that one pivotal moment. Talas. The battlefield where swords clashed, empires collided, and the fate of nations was rewritten. Even the Chinese, after Talas, pulled back from Central Asia. Their influence waned. They never again pushed so far west. And in the power vacuum they left behind, Islam surged forward. Little did the warriors of that age know that their decisions, their betrayals, and their battles would shape not only the fate of their tribes, but of the entire Muslim Ummah. The Karluks had not just betrayed the Tang. They had opened the door to a new future. A future where the Turks would not be enemies of Islam, but its shield, its sword, its future kings and caliphs. And yet, even now, one question remains. Was it only politics that drew the Turks to Islam? Or was there something in the faith, its sense of discipline, its moral code, its powerful simplicity, that spoke to their warrior hearts? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps history moves not just through strategy and betrayal, but through belief. And belief, once kindled, spreads like wildfire across the open steppe. It was not supposed to be the defining moment of an era. To the soldiers standing on the banks of the Talas River in 751 CE, this was just another campaign. Another battle for land, for dominance, for the Silk Road. But history does not ask permission before changing course. It began like any other confrontation between great empires. On one side stood the Tang dynasty, a titan of the East, proud and confident. Their general, Gal Shenji, was a seasoned commander. His army was experienced, diverse, and trained to perfection. They had pushed far west, expanding China's influence deep into Central Asia. Talas was simply another step forward in a long march of victory. On the other side stood the Abbasids, young in power but fierce in ambition. Their revolution had only recently overthrown the Umayyads, and they were eager to solidify their control. Leading their force was Ziyad ibn Salih, a man with both political cunning and battlefield wisdom. His army was composed of Muslims from the Caliphate, Arabs, Persians, and others, unified not by tribe or ethnicity, but by faith. And between them stood the Karluks, the Turks, allies of the Tang, but not bound by blood, not loyal by heart. They watched. The early stages of the battle unfolded with disciplined fury. The Chinese launched a flanking assault on the Muslim lines, and for a time, it seemed as though they would prevail. They had superior coordination and heavy cavalry. Gal Shenji's men fought with the precision of a machine honed by decades of conquest. But something wasn't right. The Karluks, positioned at the flanks as support for the Tang, were hesitant. They moved slowly, deliberately, watching both sides, waiting, not the outcome, but the opportunity. And then, in a moment that would echo across centuries, they struck. Not against the Abbasids, but against their own allies, the Chinese. The betrayal was sudden, brutal, devastating. The Karluks turned and attacked the Tang forces from behind, cutting through their rear ranks with savage force. Chaos erupted. Gal's carefully arranged formations crumbled. Soldiers, caught between two fronts, panicked. Arrows rained down from behind. Spears drove forward from the front. It was a trap. And it had worked. The Abbasids, recognizing the sudden shift, surged forward with renewed force. Surrounded and disoriented, the Tang army collapsed. Thousands died. Many were captured. The rest fled east, scattered and broken. Gal Shenji barely escaped with his life. And just like that, the fate of Central Asia changed. The Chinese would never again project power this far west. Their hold on the Silk Road was broken. Their expansion halted. Their influence, which had once stretched far beyond the Great Wall, now receded into silence. And in that silence, Islam advanced. But while the battle was won, what made Talas a true turning point wasn't just military, it was symbolic. For the first time, the Turks had chosen the side of Islam. Not because they were forced, not because they were conquered, but because they saw something. Something worth aligning with. Something that offered more than military gain. The Karluks had made a political move, yes. But they had also opened their world to a new belief system, one that resonated with their warrior spirit, their sense of justice, and their thirst for meaning. In the aftermath, the Turks didn't just go home with Abbasid gold. They left with impressions, stories, conversations, friendships, ideas. They had broken bread with Muslims, prayed beside them, listened to the Quran being recited, observed their discipline and humility. And slowly, something stirred. For centuries, the Turks had believed in the vast sky, in Tengri, in the cycle of life and nature. But Islam spoke to their heart in a different way. It offered a personal God, one who listened, forgave, commanded, and loved. A God not just above them in the sky, but present in their every action. A God of strength, of truth, of purpose. The Abbasids, seeing the potential of these fearsome allies, began recruiting more Turks into their ranks, not just as soldiers, but as elite guards, advisors, even generals. The Mamluks, the Ghilman, Turkish slaves trained to become warriors, would go on to wield immense power in the Islamic world. Eventually, they would establish their own sultanates. But all of that came later. In this moment, at Talas, the doors had been opened. A civilization that once looked to Tengri now turned its eyes to Tawhid. The call to prayer, once foreign, would soon echo across the steppes. Yet this turning point was not only religious, it was civilizational. Because when the Turks embraced Islam, they didn't just join a faith. They transformed it. They brought their military genius, their fierce independence, their nomadic resilience. They infused Islam with new energy, becoming its sword in the east, its shield in the west. From the Karahanits to the Seljuks to the mighty Ottomans, the legacy of Talas would ripple forward. Empires would rise from the decision made that day. Cultures would merge. Mosques would replace temples. Qurans would be copied by Turkish hands. Scholars, poets, and generals would emerge from this once pagan people, now Muslims by choice, not by force. And as for the Abbasids, they gained more than just a victory. They gained a new brotherhood. One forged in fire, betrayal, and belief. Talas was not a battle of numbers. It was a battle of identity, of direction. It was the moment when a proud, free, warrior nation decided its future. And though the Karluks may not have known it at the time, their betrayal of the Chinese wasn't just a tactical maneuver. It was a step into history, into Islam, into destiny. And so, in that chaotic clash on the riverbanks of Central Asia, we find the turning point, not only of a war but of a world. The Turks, who once rode under the endless blue sky with the name of Tengri on their lips, would now ride for the sake of Allah. They would defend Islam, expand its frontiers, build its cities, and carry its banner higher than anyone had before. And it all began with a decision, a betrayal, a battle, Talas, where a people changed their future, and in doing so, helped shape the future of the Muslim world. The dust had settled at Talas. The riverbanks, once soaked in the blood of warriors, now ran silently under the Central Asian sky. But history does not rest. It moves forward, quietly, relentlessly, and what happened that day would ripple far beyond the battlefield. In the aftermath of the battle, the Tang dynasty, humiliated and deeply shaken, pulled its influence back toward the east. Never again would Chinese power extend so boldly into Central Asia. The region they once considered within their sphere was no longer theirs. The road was now open to another force, one that did not conquer with legions, but with belief, with trade, with time. That force was Islam. And the Turks, once skeptical outsiders, had now taken their first real step into that world. The Abbasids, victorious and watchful, understood the opportunity before them. They had not only defeated a mighty empire, they had gained a new ally. An ally forged in battle, bound not by lineage or culture, but by shared struggle. The Karluks, after their fateful betrayal of the Tang, emerged as one of the most influential Turkic tribes in Central Asia. With Abbasid recognition and Islamic influence spreading, their prestige rose. And as the decades passed, other Turkic tribes, once wary of the Muslim message, began to listen more closely. What began as a strategic alliance slowly became something more. The Karluks were among the first Turkic peoples to convert to Islam, and their example paved the way for a monumental shift in the region. Within 2 centuries, entire dynasties of Turkic origin would not only embrace Islam, but embody it. The Karahanate, emerging in the 10th century, were the first major Turkic Muslim dynasty. They ruled over Transoxiana and much of Central Asia, building mosques, supporting madrasas, and fostering Islamic scholarship. Their reign was proof that Islam had not merely entered Turkic society, it had taken root. Under the Karahanites, Islam was no longer an outsider's faith. It became their identity. But this was only the beginning. From the Karahanites would rise the Seljuks, a dynasty that would shape the Islamic world profoundly. The Seljuks brought discipline, order, and military strength into the Islamic heartlands. They became protectors of the Abbasid Caliphate, even as the Caliphs themselves faded into symbolic figures. It was under the Seljuks that Islamic civilization flourished in Persia and Anatolia. They preserved the Sunni tradition during a time of Shia challenge. They protected the holy cities. They funded scholars like Al-Ghazali. And they brought unity to a world that had begun to fracture. And through them, the Turks became something more than converts. They became the guardians of the Islamic world. And then came the final flowering, the greatest of all Turkic Muslim empires. The Ottomans. From a small principality on the edge of the Byzantine Empire, they would rise to become the Caliphs of the Muslim world. They would take Constantinople and rename it Istanbul. They would rule over 3 continents for 6 centuries. Their sultans would lead prayers in mosques larger than any seen before. Their armies would defend Islam against crusaders and rivals alike. And yet, they were the descendants, by blood and by spirit, of those same Turkic tribes who once worshipped the sky god. The journey from Tengri to Tawhid had come full circle. But in reflecting on this transformation, something deeper emerges. The Turks did not convert to Islam through coercion. They were not subjugated or humiliated. They came to Islam because it met them where they were. Islam, with its balance of strength and submission, discipline and mercy, honor and humility, spoke to the warrior's heart. It gave meaning beyond conquest. It gave structure beyond tribal loyalty. It gave unity to a people once scattered across the windswept steppes. And the Muslim world, in turn, gained more than just a new nation of believers. It gained protectors, builders, scholars, statesmen, poets, philosophers, architects of empire. Without the Turks, Islam might never have survived the Mongol invasions. Without the Turks, the Byzantine Empire might never have fallen. Without the Turks, the Caliphate itself might have died out centuries earlier. So when we ask the question, why did the Turks become Muslim, the answer is layered. Yes, there were politics. Yes, there were battles. Yes, there were alliances and betrayals. But there was also something more. There was recognition. Recognition that Islam was not a foreign tongue, it was a language of truth. That the Quran was not just a book, it was a guide for life. That the Prophet Muhammad was not just an Arab leader, but the messenger of Allah to all mankind. And so, a people once known only for their fierceness in war would become known for something else. For their loyalty to faith. For their defense of Islam. For their legacy, one that still shapes the Muslim world today. We often look at history as a series of events, dates, battles, empires. But behind every date is a decision. Behind every empire is an identity. And behind the Battle of Talas was a choice. The Turks chose Islam. And in doing so, they changed not only themselves, but the destiny of an entire civilization. Today, when we hear the Adhan echoing in Istanbul, When we see the domes of mosques in Samarkand, when we read the works of Muslim scholars from Bukhara to Cairo, we are witnessing the fruits of a seed planted in the 8th century. A seed that took root in the soil of courage, discipline, and curiosity. And that seed was watered on the banks of Talas.